On a quiet night at a tropical resort, a gang of kidnappers spotted a wealthy black couple and assumed they had an easy target. They saw the designer bracelet, the carefree smiles, the relaxed confidence of people who seemed untouchable. They waited for the right moment and abducted the wife, convinced the husband would pay without question. What they did not know was that he was a Navy SEAL, relentless, unforgiving, and trained to hunt those who threaten what he loves. He would not bargain. He would not plead. He would find them, dismantle their operation, and bring her home himself. And by the time he was done, their gang would be destroyed, their empire shattered, and their leader behind bars. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The sun dipped low over the endless stretch of turquoise water, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. The gentle lull of the waves kissed the shore, a rhythmic whisper against the pristine white sand. Aziel King leaned back in his lounge chair, his muscled frame relaxed, but never fully at ease. Even here, a cool breeze rustled through the towering palm trees, carrying the scent of salt and something sweeter, the faint trace of Elysia's coconut-scented sunscreen. She sat beside him, her dark curls catching the last golden rays of the setting sun, a vision of effortless grace. A cocktail glass, the rim dusted with sugar, dangled loosely from her fingertips as she traced lazy patterns into the sand with her free hand. Her skin, kissed by the sun, glowed against the white linen cover-up draped over her swimsuit. "You're thinking too much," she murmured, not bothering to look at him. Aziel smirked, shifting his gaze from the horizon to his wife. "I don't think that's possible." Elysia finally turned her head, her dark eyes sparkling with amusement. "Yes, it is. You're sitting in literal paradise, but I can already see your brain running tactical assessments. You've probably memorized every exit off this beach, haven't you?" Aziel exhaled a soft laugh, his head tilting back slightly. "Maybe." She sipped her drink, the condensation from the glass cooling her fingertips. "Just once. I'd love to see you turn it off." Aziel studied her for a long moment, the love he had for her settling deep in his chest. She had always been the one to remind him that life wasn't just about survival, it was about living. Even after all these years, she still looked at him the way she always had, with knowing patience and a quiet challenge. "For you," he said, voice low and smooth. "I'll try." Elysia gave him a satisfied smile before setting her drink aside and standing up. She stretched, her body silhouetted against the soft pink glow of the sky. "Good, because I booked us a couples massage in 20 minutes. And after that," she leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a playful whisper, "we're going dancing." Aziel raised a brow. "Dancing?" She grinned. "A nightclub? Live DJ. Beautiful people. That thing normal married couples do on vacation." Aziel gave her an amused look, but he didn't argue. He could deny her nothing. Not when she looked at him like that. For now, they were just husband and wife, black, beautiful, and basking in a moment of peace. They had no idea it would be the last one. The music thumped through the club, a heavy bass that rattled the floors and pulsed through the bodies packed into the dance floor. The scent of sweat, alcohol, and expensive perfume mixed into the air, creating an intoxicating atmosphere where people lost themselves in the rhythm, the flashing lights, and the luxury of the night. Aziel and Elysia King moved through it all like they belonged there, because they did. They had chosen this club for a reason. Exclusive but not pretentious. Upscale but not dull. It was the kind of place where the wealthy played. A world where a black couple like them could sip their drinks without sidelong glances, without hushed whispers assuming they were out of place. Aziel was always aware, though. Years of military training, of reading people, sensing shifts in energy, never truly left him. But tonight, he let himself breathe, let himself just be a man with his wife, celebrating life. Elysia, as always, moved with effortless confidence, her deep brown skin glowing under the club's ambient light, her fitted dress hugging her curves with an elegance that made heads turn. She didn't notice, Or if she did, she didn't care. She only had eyes for him. "You see, this isn't so bad," she murmured into his ear, her voice smooth, teasing. Aziel smirked. "I never said it was bad. You fought me on this. I'm still deciding if you were right." Elysia rolled her eyes but smiled, pulling him closer as the music shifted to a sultry, hypnotic rhythm. "Well, then I better make sure you remember this night." Aziel didn't dance often, but for her, he did, hands firm at her waist, guiding her as she pressed against him, moving in perfect sync. The world blurred, the music became distant, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about strategy or escape routes. He was just there, with her. But across the room, they were being watched. 3 men sat near the VIP section, drinks in hand, talking quietly while their eyes never left Aziel and Elysia. Jason Grim Toller, the leader, was leaned back in his seat, cool and calculating. Ray Red Calloway, his enforcer, had a twisted smirk on his scarred face as he muttered something to the third man, Duke, who gave a low chuckle in response. "They don't belong here," Duke muttered, swirling his drink, his lip curled in something between amusement and contempt. "What are they trying to prove?" Red scoffed. "Some rich guy throwing money around like he owns the place. Flashy, arrogant. Look at his wife dressed like royalty. Easy pickings." His tone carried resentment, the kind that came from men who refused to believe that black wealth could come from hard work, intelligence, and success. Grim didn't respond right away. He was still watching, still assessing. He didn't care about the color of their skin, he cared about what was in their bank account. And just from the way Elysia's dress hugged her figure, from the shimmer of gold at her wrist, the diamond at her throat, he knew one thing. They were worth a fortune. Red leaned forward. "We follow him out. Grab the woman. He'll pay." Grim nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Not yet. Let's see if she strays first." And as if the night had conspired to make their job easier, Elysia leaned into Aziel's ear, her lips brushing against his skin. "I'll be right back," she murmured, her fingers lingering on his shoulder before she turned and disappeared toward the restroom. Aziel let her go without a second thought. But the moment the bathroom door swung shut behind her, Red pushed back his chair and stood. "Showtime." Grim took another sip of his whiskey, watching as Red moved through the crowd, his grin widening. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. The music from the nightclub pulsed through the walls, muffled but steady, a rhythmic beat that vibrated through the floor. The scent of citrus soap and perfume lingered in the air as Elysia stood at the sink, reapplying her lipstick. Her reflection in the mirror captured the relaxed glow on her face, a woman enjoying her evening, savoring the kind of moment she and Aziel had not had in a long time. She barely registered the restroom door opening behind her at first. The sound was subtle, unremarkable, but something about the way it stopped partway open made her pause. The atmosphere in the room shifted slightly. An unspoken disturbance in the air. Her eyes flicked up to the mirror, and that was when she saw it. A man stood near the entrance, unmoving, his posture rigid, his gaze set on her. He was not walking toward the stalls, nor did he seem to be waiting for anyone. He was simply there, watching. Elysia turned slowly, her fingers gripping the edge of the sink, her heartbeat picking up in her chest. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark jeans and a button-up rolled at the sleeves. At a glance, he could have been mistaken for another club patron, someone who belonged here. But there was something unsettling in the way his eyes moved, scanning her as if he were making calculations in his mind. Before she could say anything, the door swung open again, and a second man stepped inside. He was stockier, with a scar running from his eyebrow down to his cheekbone. His presence erased any doubt about what this was. Elysia felt her stomach tighten, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had always been able to read a situation, and this one told her exactly what was happening. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she kept her face neutral. If she reacted too soon, if she showed them that she knew, It would only give them an advantage. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady, controlled. She reached for her clutch, slipping her fingers inside. "I was just leaving." The man with the scar smirked and stepped forward, casually blocking her way. "Not yet," he said. Her grip on the clutch tightened. There was only one way out of this room, and they were standing in it. If she screamed, the music outside was too loud for anyone to hear. But she knew one thing for certain. Aziel would come looking for her soon. She just needed to buy herself time. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, keeping her voice cold, irritated rather than fearful. "But if you don't move..." The taller man reached for her wrist. The moment his fingers touched her skin, she reacted. Elysia twisted sharply, her free hand moving fast as she snatched the small metal hairpin from her clutch and drove it toward his arm. He jerked back just in time. But she did not stop there. She kicked out, her heel slamming into his shin with enough force to make him stumble. The man grunted, but before she could pull away, the one with the scar grabbed her other wrist and yanked her forward. Elysia struggled, twisting, pulling against his grip. She was not going to make this easy for them. The taller man recovered quickly, grabbing her other arm to keep her from moving. The sudden force of both men dragging her forward made her bracelet snap off, the gold piece slipping from her wrist and falling onto the tiled floor. Neither of them noticed, but she did. Her heart pounded as she was pulled toward the door, her mind racing. The bracelet was unique, a gift from Aziel, something he would recognize in an instant. If he found it, he would know something was wrong. She dug her nails into the man's wrist, making him hiss in irritation, but his grip only tightened. "Feisty one," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. He pressed his hand against her mouth, his palm rough against her skin. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." She thrashed harder, twisting, kicking, doing everything she could to slow them down. The restroom door swung open. The sound of the club poured in, the music, the laughter, the voices of people who had no idea what was happening just feet away. Aziel was somewhere out there, but he did not see her. A wave of helplessness crashed over her as they dragged her through the side exit. The moment swallowed her whole, a cloth over her mouth, the rush of dizziness that followed. The last thing she heard before everything faded into darkness was the sound of the bass disappearing, the club growing distant, and the low murmur of the man's voice. "He's going to pay real good for this one." The energy inside the nightclub remained as intense as ever, the rhythm of the music vibrating through the floors, the pulse of neon lights flashing across the space in hypnotic waves. Aziel stood near the edge of the dance floor, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, his fingers absent-mindedly rolling his glass between them as he waited. Elysia had stepped away some time ago, her absence initially unremarkable. A brief interlude in their evening, nothing more than the natural flow of a night out. He had let her go without hesitation, trusting she would return, knowing that she could handle herself. But now, as the minutes stretched longer than they should have, the ease he had felt just moments before began to shift, that familiar tightening in his gut, stirring in the place where instinct overruled logic. His watch confirmed what he already suspected. Too much time had passed. He set his drink down, his expression remaining composed, as he began moving through the crowd with deliberate intent, scanning every face, every corner, his mind calculating possibilities as he made his way toward the hallway leading to the restroom. There was no immediate sense of panic, no wild assumptions clouding his judgment, only the creeping sensation that something was off. His instincts, honed by years of training and combat, were rarely wrong. As he stepped into the dimly lit corridor, the pounding bass softened slightly, the barrier of thick walls muting the chaos of the club behind him. A few women passed by, laughing in hushed tones, their conversations casual and unhurried, their presence normal in every way. But it was not normal that Elysia had not returned. His eyes swept the floor out of habit, catching on something near the entrance of the women's restroom. A small glint of gold flickered under the low lighting. His steps slowed, and without hesitation, he crouched, reaching down and closing his fingers around the object. The weight of it was familiar, and in an instant, his pulse quickened with a force that was invisible to the world but undeniable within him. It was Elysia's bracelet, the one she never removed, the one that had rested against her wrist just moments before when she had danced with him, her laughter warm against his skin. There was no reason it should be here, discarded like an afterthought, unless something had gone very wrong. Straightening, he slid the bracelet into his pocket, his expression unreadable, his movements unhurried but precise as he pushed open the door to the women's restroom. The few women inside paused at his presence, their confusion evident, but he ignored them, his gaze sweeping across the space in a calculated scan. The room was empty aside from them, no immediate sign of distress, no overturned objects, nothing obvious to indicate a struggle. And yet, the absence of evidence did nothing to ease the weight pressing down in his chest. Turning back toward the hallway, he stepped through the doorway and continued moving, his strides purposeful as his mind began piecing the situation together, the facts and possibilities merging into something cold and undeniable. There were no signs of her inside the club, no messages from her phone, and now the only tangible piece of her was a bracelet left behind in a place it should never have been. That meant one thing: she had been taken. His pace quickened as he moved through the club, though outwardly his expression remained calm, controlled, composed. But beneath that exterior, something far more dangerous had settled into place, something that had not stirred in a long time. He passed the booths, the bar, the VIP sections, weaving through the crowd without hesitation, making his way toward the nearest exit, the one that provided the quickest route to the outside. As he approached the side entrance, a bouncer stood near the door, engaged in idle conversation with another staff member, both oblivious to the weight pressing down on Aziel's chest. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, his presence demanding immediate attention as he fixed his gaze on the man standing in front of him. "Did you see a black woman leave through here?" His voice was steady, even, but there was a sharpness beneath it that made the bouncer straighten slightly. The man glanced toward the exit before looking back at Aziel, his brows furrowing as if searching his memory. "Man, a lot of people come and go. Hard to say." Aziel did not break eye contact, his patience razor-thin, his tone even sharper as he stepped closer, making the space between them feel significantly smaller. "Think harder." The bouncer hesitated, his expression shifting from indifference to something more cautious, sensing the weight behind the question. He glanced toward his coworker before exhaling, rubbing the back of his neck. "Now that you mention it," his voice trailed off for a moment before he nodded toward the door. "A couple of guys came through here a little while ago. They had a woman with them. She looked kind of out of it, like she was sick or something. I figured they were helping her." Aziel's stomach coiled into a tight knot, though outwardly he remained unreadable. What did they look like? The bouncer frowned slightly, as if trying to recall the details. Big guys. One had a scar across his face. The other was taller, blonde. They left out back. Aziel turned without hesitation, pushing open the heavy metal door, stepping into the cool night air. The alley stretched into darkness, the hum of distant traffic filling the silence. His gaze swept over the pavement, moving quickly over the damp concrete until he saw it. Tire marks, fresh ones, a van. His pulse remained steady, his breathing slow, but inside, the storm continued to rise. They had taken her. He knew it with certainty, knew that every second that passed was another second she was getting further away, knew that the men responsible had no idea what they had just started. Stepping back into the club, he pulled his phone from his pocket, pressing a number that connected after a single ring. The voice on the other end was alert, sharp, understanding more from the silence than from anything he had yet to say. "Aziel?" His voice did not waver, did not rise, did not betray the fury beginning to coil beneath his skin. It remained controlled, composed, cold in its certainty. They took Alicia. A pause settled over the line, a silence heavy with unspoken understanding. When the response came, it was quiet, steady, carrying with it the weight of an inevitable war. Where do we start? Aziel's answer was immediate. Security feed, side entrance. 15 minutes back. The call ended as he moved swiftly, his path cutting through the club without pause. The pulsing music, the flashing lights, the press of bodies all became irrelevant. Distant noise in a world that had narrowed to a single objective. His steps brought him to a worn metal door marked "Employees Only," and he pushed through without hesitation. The security room was small and cramped, illuminated by the cold glow of monitors displaying every angle of the club. Behind the desk, a heavy-set man with a patchy beard and a uniform stretched tight across his stomach barely looked up from his phone. His eyes flicked upward, and the moment he registered Aziel, his lip curled with the lazy smirk of a man who felt comfortable hiding behind his position. "Help you with something?" "He's out front," the guard muttered, his tone dry and edged with faint amusement. His gaze lingered a fraction too long, and the condescension in his voice wasn't subtle. "Didn't think this was your kind of spot." Aziel's voice cut through the room, cold and unyielding. "My wife was taken. Show me the footage. Side entrance. 15 minutes back." The guard leaned back in his chair, the smirk deepening as he folded his arms. "And you think you can just come back here and bark orders? People like you always think waving some money gets you whatever you want." Aziel's eyes locked on the man, and his voice, low and edged with ice, carried the promise of something far more dangerous than threats. "Pull the footage. Now." The guard's arrogance faltered. He sat up, his bravado cracking under the weight of something he couldn't place, but instinctively feared. "Fine, man. Relax," he muttered, turning to the console with a sour grumble. His fingers tapped the keys slowly, almost deliberately dragging his heels. Aziel stepped forward, his patience thinning to a razor's edge. Without a word, his hands brushed past the guards on the keyboard, and with quick, practiced movements, he adjusted the interface. The guard stiffened. "Hey, what are you—" "You're too slow," Aziel said flatly, his eyes never leaving the screen. His fingers moved with mechanical precision, scrolling through timestamps, isolating angles. The feed rewound, the seconds ticking back until the alley behind the club flickered into view. "There," he said, his voice sharp. The footage showed two men, their movements rough and hurried, dragging Alicia toward a van. She fought them. Her defiance was clear, even in the grainy black and white footage, but they overpowered her, shoving her forward. Aziel's jaw tightened, but his focus remained unshaken. He keyed in a command. "Zoom." The guard hesitated before tapping the control, the image pulling tighter on the scene. The taller man, bald with a broad, brutish build, yanked Alicia's arm. As he turned, the camera caught it, his hand wrapped around her wrist, and the mark that branded his skin. Aziel's eyes sharpened, closer. On his hand. The frame zoomed again, the distortion rough, but not enough to hide what Aziel saw. A tattoo. Black ink, bold and jagged, scarred across the back of the man's hand. It was unmistakable. A swastika, interwoven with an iron cross, the symbols merged into a design that spoke of violence and cruelty. Beneath them, carved into the flesh, were three letters in thick, brutal strokes. SFV. The guard's voice, no longer smug, cracked with uncertainty. "What is that? SFV? Never heard of it." His bravado had drained away, leaving behind only unease. Some prison thing? Aziel didn't answer. His mind had already committed every detail to memory. The shape of the tattoo, the curve of every line, burned into him. His focus shifted to the van. He keyed another command, isolating the vehicle as it turned from the alley. The camera's angle caught it. A flash of metal against the glare of headlights, the license plate. His voice was cold, surgical. "Enhance the plate." The guard fumbled but obeyed, tapping the keys to sharpen the frame until the string of numbers became clear. There, that's the best I can do. Aziel's eyes flicked over the digits, locking them into memory, and his hand moved to the console again, transferring the segment onto a flash drive. The guard, watching with nervous curiosity, asked with a forced chuckle, "You some kind of military or something?" Aziel's reply was curt, final. "You ask too many questions." The guard shifted uncomfortably, his bluster gone. "Hey, look, man, these guys, they don't seem like the type you want to mess with. You sure you want to do this alone?" Aziel's gaze flicked to him, cold and direct. "You're done talking." The guard swallowed hard and leaned back, raising his hands slightly, offering no further resistance. Aziel turned and walked out, the flash drive and the plate number secured, his mind already moving forward. The guard's voice, hollow now, drifted faintly behind him. "You're a dead man walking." The cool night air met his skin, but he felt none of it. His thumb hit the dial on his phone before he reached the alley's mouth. The line connected immediately, and the familiar voice on the other end snapped to readiness. "Aziel, I have a plate," he said, his voice a blade, stripped of everything but the hunt. "Sending it now." The man, bald, hand tattoo, swastika and iron cross. 3 letters. SFV. The voice on the other end went rigid. "SFV? Never heard of them. But I will. Running the plate and the mark now." "Give me a few." Aziel's eyes tracked the faint skid marks where the van had sped off, his body still, but his blood moving like fire. "Make it fast." The reply came sharp. "On it." The line dropped. The alley fell back into silence, the world shrinking into the cold hum of the city and the simmering certainty within him. Aziel King was on their trail, and he would follow it until nothing remained of them but dust. The cold night pressed against Aziel's skin as he moved through the shadows, the rail yard's steel bones creaking faintly in the distance. His phone, gripped tight in his hand, lit the path to his next strike. The plate number and the partial details he had gathered from the van were already being processed by the only person he trusted to get him the answers fast. The seconds stretched thin until the phone buzzed, and the voice on the other end came sharp and ready. "I got something. Plates cold scraped after they dumped the van, but I ran the chassis number through deep scans, traced it to a rental stolen 2 days ago. That van's a ghost now. But there's more." Aziel's pace didn't break, his eyes scanning every shadowed corner as he spoke. "Go on." "Ran the tattoo. SFV. Means searching for victims. They're not big, but they're loud and lethal. Small, but connected. Known for high-value kidnappings and executions. Think of them as freelancers. No rules, just profit. They hit quick, get paid, then vanish. Nobody's seen their faces and lived long enough to talk." Aziel's voice was cold, steady, and devoid of anything but calculation. "Where do they go after the hit?" A faint tap of keys came through the line before the answer. "No known headquarters. They move like a pack, but they've used warehouses and meatpacking plants before. I cross-checked recent power surges near your area. Got one spike an old meat plant near the rail yard. Could be nothing. Could be them. Only anomaly. For miles." Aziel's jaw tightened. "That's them." The voice hesitated, then pressed on. "Aziel, these guys, when they take someone, they don't just want money. They want to break you. They pick their targets carefully. They chose you." Aziel's reply was ice. "Then they chose wrong." Before the call could end, his phone buzzed again. A second line, unknown number. The shift inside him was immediate. A slow, cold fire ignited in his chest. He accepted the call, his voice dropping into something hard and sharp. "Speak!" The line crackled, and then a voice, smug and thick with amusement, oozed through. "Aziel King, you're quicker than I expected. Most men would still be running in circles, but you're already knocking at the door. That's impressive." Aziel's voice, flat and deadly, cut through the static. "Where is she?" A low chuckle, amused and slow. "You don't waste time. I like that. But here's how this goes. You want your wife back? You pay. 20 million. No tricks, no cops. You've got 48 hours. Aziel's fingers curled around the phone, his tone turning to steel. You're making a mistake. The voice sharpened, the amusement thinning into something harder. No, King. You're the one who'll be making a mistake if you don't follow the rules. We know who you are. We know what you've done. But this isn't a battlefield. It's business. You pay, you get her back. You don't, well, let's not make it messy. Aziel's reply was a command. Put her on. A pause, then static, followed by a sound that sent his pulse into a controlled burn. Alicia's voice, sharp but unbroken. Aziel. The pressure in his chest coiled tighter, but his voice remained a lifeline of iron. I'm here, Alicia. I'm all right, she said quickly, her words clear and urgent. Don't. The line shifted, and the man's voice returned, thick with mockery. That's enough of that. See? She's breathing, but if you want her to keep doing that, you move fast. 48 hours. Tick-tock, King. Aziel's voice, cold as death, slipped through. Enjoy your time with her. You don't have much left. The line went dead, the silence that followed thick and crushing. His phone dropped from his ear, and for a fraction of a second, everything narrowed to the pounding of his own pulse. Then he moved, his thumb pressing the call back to his contact. They made contact. 20 million. 48 hours. They're holding her at the meat plant. The voice on the line came back, edged with urgency. You sure? Aziel's voice was final. They just confirmed it without knowing. Cross-reference all traffic cams from the last hour. Look for any vehicles diverting from the main roads toward that plant. I want them pinned. A pause. Then the voice responded, tight and ready. On it. You want backup? Aziel's answer came without hesitation. No, you're walking into their nest, Aziel. SFV doesn't play fair. This isn't a war zone. It's a trap. Aziel's voice dropped to something colder. Something certain and inevitable. No, it's a hunt, and they're already dead. The call ended, and the night pressed against Aziel with a stillness that felt like the pause before a storm. His fingers curled tightly around the bracelet in his palm, the delicate chain cool against his skin. It was Alicia's, one he had clasped around her wrist himself, a promise made in gold. Now it was a breadcrumb, left behind not as surrender, but as a signal. She was still fighting. She was telling him where to come. 20 million. 48 hours. They had set their price and placed their bet. The money was nothing to him. He could wire it in minutes, see her freed, and walk away. But he would be walking away from more than the money. They would use it to fuel their reach, to buy more weapons, more victims. His 20 million wouldn't save Alicia. It would buy someone else's suffering. And he would have to live with that stain forever. But if he didn't pay, his thumb hovered over his contacts. One call, one transfer, and she would live. The thought twisted through his ribs like glass. His teeth clenched, and his body went rigid with the war inside him. They had forced him into a cage of choices, but they had made one mistake. They believed he was a man with only one weapon. He wasn't. The phone slipped back into his pocket. His choice was made. He wasn't paying a ransom. He was collecting one. The bracelet, warm now from his skin, rested tight in his grip as he started toward the warehouse. His steps were soundless, his body moving with the fluidity of a man built for the dark. The gang thought they knew him. They thought they had him cornered, but they had miscalculated. They saw a desperate husband. They would meet something far worse. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with the scent of oil and rust. Overhead, broken windows let the night seep through, casting cold shafts of moonlight across the cracked concrete floor. Red paced lazily, his boots tapping against the ground in a slow, mocking rhythm. His eyes, dark with amusement, flicked toward the chair where Alicia sat, her wrists bound, her body tense but upright. You know, Red's voice slithered, low and cruel, your husband's probably losing his mind right about now. I bet he's got his phone out, ready to drain every account he's got. That's what love does, right? Makes you weak. Makes you pay any price. Elysia's eyes, sharp and unwavering, stayed on him. You don't know him. Red's smirk widened as he crouched in front of her, his eyes searching hers, relishing every flicker of defiance. I know enough. Rich boy with too much pride and too much money, but it won't save you. Your leverage, sweetheart. Nothing more. Elysia's lips pressed into a thin line, but her voice stayed cool, even. You're wrong about him. Red chuckled. A low, ugly sound. I hope he pays fast. Because if he doesn't, well, let's just say, I get bored easily. And bored men do terrible things. Elysia's gaze didn't waver, but her fingers, unseen behind her, worked meticulously at the frayed edges of her binding. She had felt the loosened fibers from the moment they tied her. She knew every creak in the floor, every sound from outside. She was listening, counting, calculating. She wasn't waiting to be saved. She was waiting to strike. Red stood and turned, his voice carrying his amusement as he called toward the shadows. So, boss, what's your bet? Think he'll pay, or do we get to have some fun? A voice answered from the gloom, colder, harder, and filled with certainty. He'll pay. Men like him always do. Rich, spoiled, soft. They throw money at their problems because they've never had to bleed for anything. Elysia's eyes flickered briefly, her lips curling into something close to a smile. You're wrong, she thought. You have no idea who's coming for you. The air inside the warehouse felt thick, every creak of the rusted beams above carrying through the silence like a warning. The cold from the concrete floor seeped through Elysia's skin, but her eyes remained sharp, her mind cutting through the dark with clarity. Red had left her for the moment, his amusement spent, but she could still feel his presence lingering like a stain in the air. She heard his voice from somewhere beyond the shadows, laughing with the others, his arrogance dripping from every word. She shifted against her bindings, feeling the raw edges of the rope scrape against her wrists. But the pressure was different now. She had worked at the fibers for minutes, her fingers slow, patient, pulling at the weak strands until she felt the first soft give of the knot loosening. But she didn't rush. Not yet. Timing was everything. The metallic clang of boots against the floor drew her attention as Red returned, his smirk pulling wide with the kind of arrogance that came from a man who believed the game was already won. The air between them felt charged, thick with the heat of everything unsaid. The price on her life, the clock ticking down, and the sharp edge of the danger he didn't see coming. You know, he began, his voice a slick drawl, I almost feel bad for you. Sitting here, waiting on a man to come save you. That's gotta be hell. Elysia's eyes lifted to his, sharp and unreadable, and though her body was still, something in her gaze shifted. Cold, calculating, and patient. You really think that's how this ends? Red's grin widened, his pride swelling under the challenge in her voice. Sweetheart, I already know how it ends. He pays. We get rich. You go free if I'm feeling generous. Or we have some fun first. Elysia's lips curved faintly, but there was no warmth in it. Funny, you're the one doing all the talking. But we both know you're not the one in charge here. The smirk on Red's face flickered, the barest crack in his armor. I'm the one standing here, aren't I? Elysia's voice was cool and precise, every word aimed like a needle. You're standing here because they let you. You're the dog they let off the leash, the muscle, nothing else. The muscles in Red's jaw ticked, his eyes darkening as he stepped closer. You've got a sharp mouth for someone who's tied up. Elysia's gaze stayed locked on his, her voice dropping just enough to slip under his skin. I'm not the one who should be worried. Because when this goes south, and it will, you're the one they'll feed to the fire first. You're disposable. And you know it. His face twisted, the false amusement slipping into something rawer. You think you're getting in my head? Cute! Elysia's voice sharpened, threading through his anger like a blade. No, I'm already there. You don't hate my husband. You fear him, because deep down, you know exactly what's coming through that door. And you're not ready for it. The flicker of control snapped. Red's patience, thin and cracking under the weight of her words, shattered. "You're really asking for it now?" His hand shot out, fingers closing around her arm, but in that second, she moved. Her wrists, now free from the ropes she had worked loose in the shadows of their conversation, twisted under his grip. Her body snapped forward, her forehead driving into his nose with a sharp, sickening crack. Blood sprayed as Red reeled back with a curse, his hands flying to his face. Elysia didn't hesitate. She launched from the chair, her shoulder driving into his ribs, and the impact sent them both crashing to the floor. Red hit hard, his breath blasting out of his lungs in a hoarse grunt, but his size was a weapon of its own. He rolled fast, his elbow driving toward her ribs, but Elysia shifted, catching the blow with her arm as she twisted free. She was on her feet in an instant, her chest heaving, her body singing with adrenaline, and her voice, sharp and cold, cut through the air. "You wanted a game? Let's play." Red, blood smeared across his face and his eyes blazing, growled low as he pushed himself up, his lips pulling back into something feral. "Oh, sweetheart, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Elysia's stance was low, ready, and her reply was a blade. "No, I just gave you a chance to regret yours." And the fight truly began. Red surged forward, his boots slamming against the concrete as he closed the distance between them, his bloodied face twisted with rage. Elysia's eyes tracked his every movement, her body light and ready, her breaths sharp and measured. He was bigger, stronger, but he was sloppy. And worse than that, he was angry. He swung first, a wild, heavy hook, but she slipped under it, her shoulder grazing his side as she spun out of reach. The force of his missed punch sent him stumbling half a step, and she struck, her knee driving into his ribs with brutal precision. Red grunted, his body jolting from the blow, but his arm lashed out like a whip, catching her shoulder and spinning her sideways. Elysia hit the floor hard, the impact rattling through her bones, but she rolled instantly, instinct driving her into motion as his boot crashed down where her head had been a second before. The crack of his heel against the concrete echoed through the warehouse, but she was already up, circling, her muscles burning but her mind cold and calculating. Red wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, his grin savage. "Not bad, but you're not walking out of here." Elysia's voice, tight with exertion but sharp with focus, cut back. "You sure about that? You're looking a little slow for someone in charge." Red's snarl twisted into something cruel. "I don't need to be fast. I just need you to stop moving." He lunged again, and this time Elysia didn't evade. She redirected. Her hands caught his arm mid-swing, and she pivoted sharply, using his momentum to send him crashing into a rusted stack of metal crates. The clang of impact rang through the warehouse, and Red collapsed into the debris with a thunderous crash, metal and dust exploding around him. But Elysia didn't wait. Her eyes snapped to the stairwell in the far corner, a faint emergency light casting a dim path upward. She bolted, her footsteps light, the sound of her rapid breaths filling her ears as she reached the stairs and ascended 2 at a time. Behind her, a snarl of rage and the crash of shifting debris signaled Red's return. "You're not getting away!" His heavy steps pounded against the concrete as he pursued, his bulk slamming into the metal stairs as he climbed with brute force. Elysia reached the upper level, the skeletal remains of a catwalk stretching across the warehouse, its metal grates rusted and worn. She felt the structure groan beneath her weight, but she didn't slow. Her eyes darted ahead, an open hatch, a possible escape, but she needed seconds. Red burst onto the catwalk behind her, his voice dripping with venom. "No more running!" Elysia turned sharply, her back to the railing, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a cold, lethal edge. "I wasn't running," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "I was leading you." Before he could process the words, her foot shot out, striking a rusted support beam at the catwalk's base. The metal, corroded from time and neglect, gave way with a sickening screech. The platform beneath Red's boots shuddered, then cracked. His eyes flashed with sudden panic as the floor beneath him collapsed. He dropped with a roar, his body crashing through the weakened steel. The impact below was a bone-jarring cacophony of twisting metal and broken crates. And then there was silence, save for his ragged, pained breaths from the wreckage. Elysia stood above, her chest rising and falling, the adrenaline surging through her veins as she stared down at the broken chaos below. Red, buried in the debris, coughed, his voice a shattered rasp. "You little—" Her voice, clear and sharp from above, sliced through the darkness. "You should have listened when I said you didn't know me." Without another second, she turned and sprinted through the hatch, the night air striking her skin as she emerged onto the rooftop. The city sprawled beneath her, a maze of concrete and shadows, and ahead, freedom. Her pulse thundered, her body screaming from the fight, but her mind burned with a single, absolute focus. Find Aziel. End this. She was no longer a captive. She was the warning they didn't see coming. The night had thickened into a cloak of cold and silence, the wind whispering through the trees as the sounds of Elysia's escape faded into the vast, dark wilderness. Her body ached, every bruise a burning memory of the fight with Red, but her mind remained sharp, her focus unbroken. The branches scraped against her skin as she pushed forward through the undergrowth, her breath ragged but steady. She had no sense of time, only the primal drive to keep moving, to get ahead, to survive. Aziel would be coming for her. She knew it as surely as she knew her own heartbeat, but she couldn't wait to be found. She had to lead him. Her eyes, sharp despite exhaustion, scanned the forest floor. And then, with a flicker of clarity, she acted. She reached down, snapping a thin branch and driving it hard into the damp earth, marking her path. Further on, she dragged her fingers through a patch of moss on a fallen tree, leaving a scar in the green. Subtle, quick, but unmistakable to him. She wasn't leaving a trail for them. She was leaving it for Aziel, and Aziel alone. The forest opened abruptly into a small clearing, and there, half hidden by the grasping arms of the trees, stood a cabin. It was old, sagging into itself with years of neglect, but it was shelter. And in this moment, it was everything. Elysia's body screamed as she stumbled up the creaking steps and pushed the warped door open. The inside smelled of wood, rot, and dust, the air cold and stale, but it was empty, safe, for now. Her eyes scanned the space, an old couch, a fireplace choked with ash, and against the wall, a rusted metal cabinet. She moved to it, her hands fumbling at the latch until it gave with a metallic groan. Inside, a battered first aid kit, the plastic cracked, but intact. She pulled it free, her fingers trembling as she popped it open. Gauze, alcohol, bandages. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She hissed as she cleaned the cuts on her arms, her hands quick and practiced. She had learned long ago how to tend her wounds. Her eyes fell on something else, tucked behind the kit, an old hunting rifle, its barrel dull with age. She pulled it free, her fingers brushing over the worn wood of the stock. No phone, no way to call for help, but this she could use. The rifle was heavy, unfamiliar, but comforting. She cracked it open one shell, still good. She felt the weight of it, the sharp finality, a signal, a warning, or a line drawn in the dirt. Her pulse pounded as she raised it skyward, her eyes narrowing against the night. The cold metal bit against her cheek as her fingers slid over the trigger. She inhaled, slow and steady, then squeezed. The crack shattered the stillness, the echo ripping through the trees and scattering every bird from their perches. The silence that followed felt immense, waiting, holding its breath with her. Then, movement, the snap of a twig, the rustle of branches. Elysia's body stiffened, the rifle lowering, her heart hammering. She turned sharply, her eyes locking on the shadow that emerged from the trees. A man, older, rugged, his face weathered by the sun and the wind. A hunter, his own rifle lowered in a posture of caution, not threat. His eyes swept over her, her bruises, her torn clothes, the blood on her hands, and his face hardened with something that felt like concern. "You all right?" His voice, roughened with age and the rasp of the outdoors, broke through the brittle silence. The words carried no urgency, only a slow and careful curiosity. Alicia, though her body was screaming for rest, kept her voice tight and her eyes colder than her pain. "Not exactly." The man's eyes flicked to the rifle she held, but his expression did not shift. "Looks like you've been through hell. You're lucky I was nearby." His gaze turned briefly toward the shadowed line of trees. "There's a road just up ahead. My truck's parked there. I can get you out of here." Her body, strained and trembling from the night's violence, wanted nothing more than to collapse. But her instincts, sharpened from the terror she had faced, screamed for caution. She held his gaze for a long moment, measuring the calm surface of his voice, searching for the cracks beneath it. Finally, her voice emerged, low and laced with warning. "You've seen them, haven't you?" The man's face, weathered and unmoved, offered no comfort. "Yeah, I've seen their kind. They've been crawling around these woods like rats. You're lucky they didn't find you first." Alicia felt the tension coil tighter in her chest, every word from his mouth a hook, searching for something in her. Her body remained tight, but she kept her voice cold and unreadable. "Maybe they already did." The man's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, more a shift of the lines on his face. "Well, you're here, and they aren't. Let's keep it that way." The wind cut through the clearing, brushing the leaves into a dry whisper. Alicia's ribs screamed with every breath, her body pleading for safety, yet her instincts, raw and bruised but unshaken, scraped against her skin. She saw nothing certain in his face, only the stillness of a man who waited for her to decide. Her fingers, trembling with exhaustion, loosened slightly on the rifle, though the fire in her voice did not soften. "All right, lead the way." The old truck rumbled along the dirt road, its engine a low growl against the vast hush of the night. The interior smelled of earth and worn leather, and the cracked window let in the bitter cold. Alicia sat rigid in the passenger seat, her body pressed toward the door, her muscles tight and coiled. The air inside felt too still, heavy with something that had not yet revealed its shape. Cal's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles worn and scarred from a lifetime of work. His eyes, cold and quiet, stayed fixed on the road ahead. But there was something too composed about his stillness. The silence between them stretched taut, broken only by the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Then Alicia saw it, the hand on the wheel. The sleeve of his worn jacket had pulled back slightly, and in the faint glow from the dashboard, she saw the mark. Her breath sharpened, the air in her chest turning cold and thin. It was unmistakable black ink, worn but clear. The jagged, brutal swastika merged with the iron cross, and beneath them, 3 letters that felt like poison on her skin. SFV. The letters, stark and raw, burned into her memory from Red's hand, from the violence she had already survived. It was the mark of the same men who had taken her. Her voice, cold and tight, cut through the suffocating space. "You're one of them." Cal's eyes flicked toward her, and in that flicker, the mask slipped. There was no shock, no hesitation, only amusement, cold and slow, bleeding through the cracks. "Smart girl," he said, his voice shifting into something raw and unburdened by pretense. Alicia's hand shot for the door handle, her body twisting as she moved to throw herself out of the vehicle, but a metallic snap sealed her fate. The locks, heavy and final, engaged with a mechanical clunk that swallowed her chance. Cal's voice, low and laced with satisfaction, filled the cab. "Not going anywhere." The phone appeared in his hand, his thumb pressing a single button, with the ease of a man closing a deal already won. His voice dropped into something cold and transactional. "I found her." The line clicked closed. Alicia's heart, a thunderous pulse in her chest, felt like it might shatter her ribs. Her body screamed to fight, to move, to shatter every inch of this cage. But his hand was already at her wrist, iron-hard and immovable. His voice, calm and cutting, seeped into her bones. "They're waiting. You're going to make this very easy for me." Her teeth clenched so tightly that her jaw ached, but her voice, burning from within her chest, was a promise carved from fire. "You're the one who's made the mistake." Cal's lips, twisting in something between a smirk and a warning, barely moved. "Maybe, but it won't matter to you." The road curved, and the lights of a distant structure, the gang's stronghold, cut through the trees like a predator's gaze. Aziel moved through the thick night, his body a silent shadow cutting through the undergrowth. His pulse pounded with cold, focused urgency, but his eyes stayed sharp, sweeping over every inch of the earth. The signs she left, small, deliberate marks that only he would see, guided him like whispers through the dark. A snapped branch, the break clean and intentional. A scuff mark low on a moss-covered rock, fresh and purposeful. The faintest trace of footprints, pressed deep where the earth was soft. She was leading him, even while running for her life. The trail brought him to the warehouse, its looming shell rusted and cold against the night sky. His approach was silent, his weapon drawn, every muscle a coil of readiness. The air here was thick with something wrong, still and heavy, like the silence after a scream. His eyes scanned the space, cutting through the shadows as he moved in, his steps swift but soundless. The air carried only the hollow echo of his breath and the faint metallic scent of oil and old iron. The truck sat in the open, the engine's heat still bleeding into the cold air. But the seat, the space where she should have been, was empty. His jaw tightened, and his voice, low and edged with lethal calm, pressed through his calm. "She isn't here." The reply, quick and sharp, hit his ear. "No movement on cams. They must have moved her. Trucks fresh follow anything you see." Aziel's eyes, cutting and precise, swept the space again. His breath, cold and steady, stilled as he saw it. Another sign, a faint scratch in the dust near the truck's tire track. The curve of it just a little too sharp, too deliberate. His gaze followed beyond it, where the earth showed a drag of broken leaves, subtle but distinct, as if something had been brushed aside. A piece of fabric, barely larger than a breath, torn and snagged on a low branch, a thread only he would recognize. She was marking her path, not to be found by them, but to guide him. His body, a machine forged by war and sharpened by love, moved with certainty. He pressed forward, following her trail, his voice cutting through the night, cold and absolute. "I have her path." Following now, the trees, vast and endless, became his battleground, and they would not hide her, not from him. The night wrapped itself around Aziel like a cold, suffocating veil, but his focus cut through it with the precision of a blade. His body moved with instinct, tracking the faint trail left in the forest's skin. The path Elysia had carved for him was subtle. Deliberate broken twigs, displaced stones, and scuffed moss, each mark a whisper of her will to survive. The forest, vast and indifferent to the violence that had unfolded beneath its canopy, held the evidence of her struggle like scars etched into its surface, and Aziel read each one with the unwavering certainty of a man who understood that these signs were not random. They were hers. The path narrowed as the woods grew thicker, and his eyes caught the subtle shift in the ground ahead. The footprints changed, her stride shortened, and the indentations deepened, as if she had been forced to move faster. His pulse sharpened. The predator's tempo had increased. They had her. The tracks bent toward the west, following a dirt path that had seen no use for years except by the weight of recent tires. The metallic tang of disturbed earth hung in the air, guiding him toward the clearing ahead. Through the break in the trees, he saw it a small cabin, half collapsed and forgotten by the world. The windows were broken, the door hanging slightly off its rusted hinges. But the soil in front of it told a different story. Aziel knelt at the edge of the clearing, his eyes narrowing as he examined the tire impressions left in the dirt. The treads were thick, deep and familiar off-road tires, likely attached to an older model truck. The faint odor of burnt rubber lingered, signaling a quick, forceful stop, followed by a sharp departure. She had been here. He rose from his crouch and crossed the clearing, his body coiled with lethal tension. The cabin door groaned as he pushed it open, the shadows inside peeling back beneath the glow of his flashlight. The interior was sparse, an old couch covered in dust, a fireplace choked with ash, and a metal cabinet pushed slightly ajar. His eyes swept the room, searching for the details that didn't belong. The floorboards near the window bore faint, uneven scratches. He knelt, running his fingers over the marks. They were deliberate. Straight lines etched into the dirt with something sharp. 5 lines, 4 vertical and 1 slashing across. A tally, a countdown. Elysia's mark. His pulse kicked faster as his gaze followed the direction of the scratches toward the cabinet. He stood and opened it, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The shelves were mostly bare, except for a thin film of dust interrupted by the absence of a rectangle roughly the size of a document folder. Someone had taken files from here. Recently, he glanced down. In the corner of the cabinet's bottom shelf, partially obscured by debris, lay a torn piece of duct tape with dirt clinging to the adhesive side. A partial fingerprint marred the surface, faint but clear enough for his trained eye. He knew that ridge pattern. It was hers. Elysia had opened this cabinet. His mind raced through the timeline. She had fired the rifle to draw attention, hoping to bring help. When none arrived, she must have found the documents and taken something crucial, something important enough for them to realize she had seen it. His eyes scanned the floor again. The faint trail of her escape ended by the front door, where the dirt was scraped and uneven. 2 sets of footprints converged here. One smaller, lighter hers. The other larger and heavier, the hunter's. Aziel's jaw clenched, the memory of the man's voice over the intercepted call resurfacing. Cal, the one who had found her, the one who had called it in. His flashlight caught a glint beneath the couch leg, and he crouched again, reaching for the object. His fingers brushed cold metal. He pulled it free and examined it under the beam. A spent rifle casing, the surface marked with the manufacturer's imprint. Blackthorn Munitions, a private supplier known to sell to extremist groups under false licenses. SFV. His grip on the casing tightened until the brass dug into his palm. His eyes scanned the floor one last time and stopped at the faintest smudge of dirt near the doorframe. His breath slowed as he recognized the pattern, the shape of a sole, with a distinctive triangular cut near the toe. It was the same tread as the boot prints from the alley where she had been taken. He followed the pattern outside, where the truck's tire marks dug deep into the soft earth. The tracks veered north. His gaze followed their trajectory and caught the faintest glimmer in the dirt. Beside them, a shard of broken glass with a smear of blood along its edge. He knelt and examined the smear's texture. The blood was mixed with the gritty residue of cabin dust. Hers. The realization hit like a hammer. She had broken that glass intentionally to mark the trail. Every instinct in him roared with urgency. She was not simply surviving. She was guiding him. His hand pressed to his comm, his voice low and lethal. I have her trail. She left a path for me. The response crackled through. What's the direction? His eyes lifted to the road ahead. The broken glass pointed toward a narrow passage through the trees. North. Confirmed, came the reply. Old lumber mill 2 miles up. Power grid shows activity. That might be their stronghold. Aziel's pulse slowed as his mind sharpened into a single point of focus. His gaze lingered on the faint imprint of her steps as they disappeared into the distance. She knew I would follow, he said softly. The forest wrapped itself around Aziel like a living thing. each breath drawn through the cold air, sharpening his senses as he followed the signs Elysia had left for him. Her trail, etched into the earth with purpose and precision, guided him north through the dense wilderness. The broken branches, the scraped bark, the faint disturbances in the moss, they all spoke the language of survival, one that she knew he would understand. Every step brought him closer, every clue reinforcing one truth: she was still fighting. The soft vibration in his pocket jolted through his body like an electric current. He stopped mid-step, his breath freezing in his throat. His hand slid into his jacket and retrieved the phone. The screen displayed the same unknown number that had shattered his world once before. The voice that answered when he picked up was the same, a low, rasping tone filled with cruel amusement. "Well, well. Quite the persistent husband." Aziel's jaw tightened, his pulse beating like a war drum. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "Where is she?" The voice chuckled softly, the sound oily and vile. "Your wife's quite the fighter. Feisty little thing. Managed to slip away for a while. You should have seen it. Almost proud of her. But," the voice trailed off, savoring the moment, "we caught her again, and let me tell you, she wasn't happy about it." Aziel's breath came slow and even, but his grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked beneath his fingers. "Let me talk to her." The voice hummed with mock consideration. "Talk to her? No. She's resting now. We had to calm her down after her little adventure. But don't worry. She's still breathing, for now." A dull throb pulsed behind Aziel's eyes as his mind painted the possibilities of what that calming had involved. He forced the rage down, locking it away behind a wall of cold focus. "What do you want?" "You know what we want." There was a pause, then a faint beep. A message notification pinged on his screen. The voice resumed, smug and relaxed. "Check your phone." Aziel lowered the device and tapped the notification. A link appeared beneath the text. "Wire transfer request." The figure displayed beneath it stole the last remnant of warmth from the night air. 50 million. The voice returned, savoring every word. "Price just went up. She made this difficult, so now you pay for the trouble." Aziel's teeth clenched hard enough to hurt. 50 million is a mistake. "Oh, we're sure you can afford it, Mr. King. You've got plenty tucked away in those offshore accounts. And here's the fun part. You only have 12 hours this time. Less if she keeps up her little tricks." The voice hardened slightly. "No more warnings, no more second chances. Pay, or she dies. And this time, she won't get the chance to run." The line clicked dead. Aziel stood frozen, the cold weight of the phone pressing into his palm. The forest around him seemed to grow still, the night air thickening as the words settled in his mind. She had escaped. She had fought her way free, but they had caught her again, and now they wanted more. His thumb hovered over the link on the screen. 50 million. A simple tap would set the process in motion. The money would cross the globe in minutes, but that transfer wouldn't buy her life. It would buy the next victim's death, and if they killed her after the payment cleared, he would be complicit in it all. His eyes hardened as he slid the phone back into his jacket. The payment was not an option. Rescuing her was the only path forward. He moved again, his steps more deliberate now, following the trail she had left before they had dragged her away. The broken glass at the tire tracks had spoken clearly to him. Her escape had been short-lived, but she had used every second of it to lead him to the place where they were holding her. The lumber mill. The structure appeared through the branches like the carcass of a dead beast, its rusted walls and collapsed roofing jagged against the night sky. Aziel stopped at the edge of the clearing, his breath steady, his mind calculating every possible angle. His eyes scanned the ground, noting the deep grooves from the tires that had brought her here. He crouched low behind a pile of stones and opened his tactical pack. His hands, practiced and efficient, moved without pause as he prepared. First, the black compression suit. He removed his outer jacket and slid into the mat, light-absorbing material that clung to his muscles like a second skin. It was designed to bend into the darkness, breaking up his silhouette against infrared scopes. Next, he strapped on his equipment belt, carbon fiber knife at his thigh, suppressed sidearm at his hip. His gloved fingers checked the slide of the weapon and the magazine's weight. Loaded, ready. His night vision lenses clipped into place over his eyes. The world shifted into hues of green and shadow, the faint glow of the mill's interior lights becoming vivid beacons. His breath slowed. His vision sharpened. The predator within him emerged, cold and unrelenting. The perimeter of the mill was poorly secured. 3 rotating cameras, their cycles predictable and careless. Aziel studied the timing, calculating the intervals with exact precision. 2 seconds of darkness in each sweep. That was all he needed. His voice slipped into his calm, low and cold. Perimeter assessment complete. Single guard at the entrance. Rotating cameras with 2-second blind spots. Moving in. The response crackled softly in his ear. Backup inbound? No backup, Aziel said, his voice as hard as steel. This is mine. He moved, each step perfectly timed to match the camera's rotations. His body flowed through the shadows like water, his breaths steady and measured. The guard at the entrance stood lazily beside the door, his rifle resting across his chest, eyes glazed with boredom. Aziel approached from behind, silent and sure. His knife slid free with a whisper of metal against fabric. The guard shifted slightly, as though sensing the shadow of his own death. It was too late. Aziel's arm wrapped around the man's throat, his other hand driving the blade beneath the ribs with a clean, upward thrust. The guard sagged instantly, his body folding without a sound. Aziel lowered him to the ground, his eyes already scanning the area for additional threats. The guard's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. Aziel retrieved it and saw the message on the screen. Inbound. Package secure. ETA 15 minuter. The package was Alicia. His mind snapped into action. 15 minutes. That was all the time he had before they brought her through that door. He slipped around the side of the building, locating the section where rust had eaten away the bottom of the corrugated metal wall. The thermal cutter hissed softly as it sliced a clean entry point. Aziel slid through, the cold steel grazing his back as he entered the mill. Inside, the space was vast, hollow, and filled with echoes. Machinery rusted with age stood like skeletal remains. But beyond the machinery, on the far side of the floor, portable lights illuminated a makeshift command center. Desks cluttered with papers, laptops open with surveillance feeds flickering across the screens. 2 men sat there, oblivious to the shadow that had entered their space. Aziel's gaze shifted beyond the command center. A metal staircase rose to a second level, where a steel door stood guarded by 2 men. The trail of faint, irregular footprints leading to that staircase froze his breath. Elysia had been here. The blood-red fire of rage simmered beneath his skin, but he forced it down. He could not let the emotion control him. The men below were watching the cameras. He needed their eyes gone. From his belt, he retrieved a compact EMP emitter. He placed it on the metal floor, activated the device, and rolled it toward the command center. The small cylinder blinked twice before emitting a high-pitched whine. The surveillance monitors crackled. Sparks burst from their edges. The room plunged into visual blindness. The 2 men cursed, standing abruptly and moving toward the screens. Aziel descended from the shadows. The knife slid into the first man's throat before he could react. The second turned, eyes wide with panic, and reached for his weapon. Aziel's gun coughed once, the suppressed shot punching through the man's chest. Both bodies crumpled to the floor. Aziel's breath slowed as his eyes returned to the staircase. The steel door at the top was his next target. He moved toward it, his mind cold and unrelenting. Every second brought him closer. Every step was one more toward her. They had underestimated him. They would not live long enough to make the same mistake twice. The cold air inside the lumber mill carried the metallic scent of oil and sweat, a silent witness to the violence brewing within its walls. Aziel moved through the shadows like a predator, his breaths controlled and measured, As he followed the faint signs Alicia had left behind, the scuff marks on the floor, the disturbed dust along the corridor's edge, each clue whispered that she had been here, had fought, and had left him a path to find her. But the trail also spoke of resistance. Her footprints, light and uneven, were surrounded by heavier marks. The enemy had struggled to contain her. They had underestimated her, and they were about to make the same mistake with him. Aziel advanced to the steel staircase that wound upward to the locked door where her tracks ended. The keypad glowed faintly in the dim light. He crouched beside it, retrieving a compact signal disruptor from his belt. The device latched onto the panel and began cycling through combinations, emitting a faint mechanical whir. His senses remained hyper-aware, his ears tuned to the faintest sound. A subtle shift of weight on the floor above, the quiet scrape of boots against concrete. They were waiting. The lock clicked open. The sound, though soft, might as well have been a starter pistol. The ceiling above him exploded with movement. The trap was sprung. 3 figures dropped through a maintenance hatch, landing with practiced efficiency around him. 2 more appeared at the far end of the corridor, cutting off his retreat. The men wore tactical gear, their faces shadowed beneath black masks, the SFV insignia stamped on their shoulders. Aziel's mind shifted into combat mode, instinct breaking down the threat with clinical precision. 2 had suppressed pistols. The others held short-barrel rifles. All 5 moved with competence. But competence was not enough. The man in the center sneered. "We've been waiting for you, King." Aziel responded with a single motion. He dropped to one knee, drawing his pistol in the same breath. The first shot struck the sneering man between the eyes before his smirk could fully fade. The second shot hit the guard to his left in the throat, sending him crashing backward with a guttural wheeze. The 3 remaining attackers reacted immediately. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor. Bullets chewed into the metal walls, sparks cascading like angry fireflies. Aziel rolled sideways, using the bodies for cover as rounds punched into the concrete floor beside him. His mind processed every angle, every threat. The man to his right shifted position first. Too aggressive, Aziel sprang from his crouch, launching into a low, driving tackle. His shoulder slammed into the guard's midsection, driving the man into the wall with a sickening crunch. The rifle clattered to the floor. Aziel's hand shot to his thigh, drawing his carbon fiber knife and driving it into the soft flesh beneath the man's chin. The body sagged instantly, blood splattering across the cracked concrete. 2 left. Aziel felt the shift of air behind him and ducked instinctively. The butt of a rifle whistled past his head. He spun with snake-like speed, his knife flashing upward. The blade bit deep into the attacker's wrist. The man howled and staggered back. Aziel kicked his knee, snapping the joint with a sharp crack, then slashed the knife across his throat. The scream died in a wet gurgle. The final man raised his pistol and fired. Aziel pivoted, but the bullet tore through the edge of his suit, slicing a line of fire across his side. He gritted his teeth against the pain and threw the knife with practiced precision. The blade struck the man's collarbone. Aziel lunged forward, seized the man's arm, and twisted until the bone snapped. The weapon clattered to the floor. "Please!" the man choked out. Aziel's voice was a cold whisper. "Where is she?" The man's eyes bulged with terror. "Upstairs. They're waiting for you." Aziel drove his elbow into the man's temple. The body collapsed, unconscious, to the ground. Breathing heavily, he retrieved his knife and wiped the blood on his sleeve. His side burned from the grazing shot, but the pain sharpened his focus. He reloaded his pistol, then approached the steel door. The enemy was prepared, but so was he. He retrieved a small smoke canister from his belt, pulled the pin, and slid it beneath the door. Smoke hissed and billowed from the bottom. A second later, gunfire erupted from within, wild and unfocused. Aziel moved. He kicked the door inward and entered low, pistol raised. The smoke swirled around him as the muzzle flash of enemy weapons lit the room like lightning. He fired twice into the closest silhouette, then dove behind an overturned metal table. The shooters were blind in the fog, relying on guesswork and panic. Aziel adjusted his night vision lenses, turning the haze into a world of green clarity. Two men flanked the center of the room, sweeping their rifles toward the table. Aziel rose with fluid grace and fired 4 times. 2 bullets hit each target. Their bodies crumpled in unison. The smoke began to thin. Across the room, he saw it. The chair sat slumped, wrists bound behind her, hair covering part of her face. Blood streaked her temple. Her chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. Relief tried to break through the ice of his focus, but he shoved it aside. The fight was not over. Movement to his right. A figure burst from behind a stack of crates, charging at him with a combat knife. Aziel sidestepped the attack, catching the man's wrist and twisting sharply. The knife clattered to the floor. Aziel drove his knee into the man's ribs, then slammed his elbow into his temple. The body crumbled into a heap. Without hesitating, Aziel rushed to Elysia's side. His knife sliced through the cable binding her wrists. Her body sagged against him, but her eyes fluttered open. Recognition and resolve replaced the haze of pain. "Aziel," she rasped. "They're regrouping." He cupped her face briefly, his voice steady. "I know. Can you move?" She gritted her teeth and pushed herself upright. "I can fight." Aziel handed her the fallen guard's pistol, and she checked the chamber with practiced efficiency. Her breath came in sharp gasps, but the steel in her expression never wavered. From the corridor beyond, footsteps thundered. The gang was converging. Aziel positioned himself beside her, raising his weapon. "They wanted us together," he said quietly. Elysia's eyes met his. They got their wish. The footsteps echoed like a drumbeat of violence through the concrete corridors of the mill. Aziel and Elysia stood side by side, backs pressed to the cold wall, their bodies bruised and breathless but unbroken. The dim, flickering lights overhead cast jagged shadows across the space ahead, where the enemy waited. The distant metallic clang of shifting boots and murmured orders betrayed their movements. The gang was regrouping, preparing to swarm. Aziel adjusted his grip on his knife, the handle slick with sweat, and streaked with the blood of those who had already fallen. His side burned from the bullet graze, his shoulder throbbed from the impact with the stairwell, and his muscles screamed for relief. But his mind remained sharp, locked onto one objective. "Get Elysia out! Take the gang down!" Elysia's breathing slowed beside him, controlled but strained. The blow to her temple had left a deep gash, and her arms trembled from the prolonged struggle. Her eyes, however, burned with clarity. She cradled the stolen submachine gun in her hands, the stock pressed firmly to her bruised shoulder. "How many?" she whispered. Aziel tilted his head, listening. The subtle patterns of movement separated into distinct rhythms in his mind. 6, maybe 7. Her jaw clenched. "That's it?" His lips twitched despite the tension. "Easy night." The humor was thin, brittle, but it steadied them both as the first shadow moved into the corridor ahead. The man came cautiously, weapon raised, his eyes scanning the dim corridor. Aziel and Elysia remained pressed against the wall, cloaked by the patchwork shadows cast from the flickering overhead light. Aziel's muscles tensed. The second the man stepped past the midpoint of the hall, he struck. He lunged forward, knife sweeping upward. The blade sank into the man's side just beneath the ribs. The man's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening to scream. Aziel clamped a hand over his mouth and twisted the knife with brutal precision. The body sagged, and he lowered it quietly to the floor. The silence shattered a second later as a voice barked from the far end of the hall. "There! Take them!" Gunfire erupted. Aziel shoved Elysia toward the corner. She dove for cover as bullets shrieked past them, punching holes in the metal wall and showering them with jagged splinters. Aziel ducked behind a rusted pillar, the sharp sting of hot metal grazing his calf. The gang advanced in staggered formation, 3 pushing forward with weapons blazing, while 2 more flanked from the side. Elysia raised the submachine gun and fired in controlled bursts. The first burst caught one attacker in the thigh, spinning him to the ground with a guttural cry. The second burst forced the others to scatter. "Flanking left!" she shouted. Aziel reacted instantly, pivoting toward the left corridor. He saw the figure sprinting into the shadows, attempting to circle behind them. Aziel holstered his pistol and gripped his knife as he charged. The flanking attacker heard him and turned, swinging a crowbar in a wide arc. Aziel ducked, feeling the rush of air as the metal whooshed past his ear. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, slamming him against the wall. The impact rattled through his injured side, stealing his breath, but he didn't stop. The man lashed out with an elbow, catching Aziel across the jaw. Pain exploded along his face, and he staggered. The attacker lunged forward, slamming the crowbar into Aziel's ribs. Aziel dropped to one knee, gasping as the metal bit deep into the muscle over his rib cage. The man sneered. "Not so tough now." Aziel didn't respond. He shifted his weight, caught the man's ankle, and yanked with all the strength he had left. The man toppled backward with a startled shout. Aziel sprang after him, ignoring the agony burning through his side. His knife pierced the man's throat with a savage, efficient thrust. Blood pooled beneath the body as Aziel staggered to his feet, vision swimming. "Elysia!" he called, voice rough. "Still here!" she shouted from the corridor. The sound of hand-to-hand combat followed her voice. Grunts, the impact of bodies colliding, and the sharp crack of bone against metal. Aziel pushed himself forward, moving toward her. He reached the corridor's mouth and froze. Two gang members had her pinned against the wall. One had wrapped an arm around her throat, choking off her air, while the other slammed a fist into her abdomen repeatedly. Elysia's face twisted in pain, but her eyes flared with rage. As the next punch came, she twisted her hips, lifting her legs and wrapping them around the attacker's neck. She wrenched her body to the side, dragging the man to the floor with a brutal scissor motion. His skull cracked against the concrete. The man choking her hesitated at the sudden shift. She jabbed her elbow backward into his ribs, then dropped low, breaking his hold. The moment she hit the ground, she rolled and came up with the fallen attacker's knife. She drove it backward into the second man's thigh, then spun and slashed across his throat as he fell. Aziel's heart surged with pride, even through the haze of pain. The corridor emptied for a moment, leaving only the bodies sprawled across the floor and the ragged sound of their breathing. Elysia wiped the blood from her lip and winced. "Please tell me that's all of them." Aziel shook his head and pointed toward the loading dock. "Not yet. They'll regroup in the control center." Her fingers flexed around the stolen knife. "Then let's go finish it." Aziel touched the comm in his ear. The signal was faint, but functional. "We've neutralized most of the hostiles. Moving toward the control center." "Copy that," came the voice on the other end. "Heads up. We intercepted a transmission. Sounds like the boss is still here. He's not running." Aziel exchanged a glance with Elysia, her lips pressed into a hard line. "Good," she said. "We owe him a visit." Together, bruised and bloodied but unbroken, they moved toward the control center. The air inside the mill thickened as Aziel and Elysia moved through the wreckage of the battle, their steps steady, despite the bruises and blood etched into their skin. The distant crackle of flames from the burning crates filled the silence, a grim soundtrack to the bodies strewn across the concrete floor. The gang's forces were decimated, but the true danger still waited beyond the steel doors of the control center. Aziel's hand rested lightly against his injured side, his breathing controlled, but shallow. Pain coiled beneath his ribs with each step, but he welcomed it. Pain was focus. Pain was clarity. Elysia followed at his side, her grip firm on the stolen submachine gun. The bruising along her jaw was darkening by the second, and blood from the cut on her temple streaked down her cheek. Yet her eyes, sharp and unyielding, remained fixed ahead. They stopped just short of the control center's reinforced double doors. Aziel knelt, his gaze tracing the floor. The dust bore faint tracks leading inward boot prints, heavy and deliberate, fresh. The leader hadn't fled. He was waiting. Alicia knelt beside him, her breath shallow. He's baiting us. Aziel gave a slight nod. Yeah, wants us funneled through the door. Her fingers flexed around the weapon. What's the plan? Aziel studied the doors. Thick steel, mechanical lock. No electronic components visible from this side. No camera above the entrance, at least none visible. He shifted his gaze to the walls, searching for the irregularities that indicated hidden countermeasures. His eyes landed on the faint glimmer of a pressure-activated strip embedded in the floor just beyond the threshold. Pressure-triggered explosives, he muttered. They want us to walk right in. Alicia's eyes followed his line of sight. So, we go around? No, Aziel said. We let them think we did. She frowned. They expect us to step in the trap. If we don't, they'll know we're onto them. Exactly. Aziel tapped his comm device and switched to a broader frequency. His voice, when it came, was sharp and deliberate. Target secured. Preparing for extraction. Deploying charges for breach in 60 seconds. He ended the transmission and shifted to a whisper. They'll intercept the frequency and think we're going loud. Alicia's eyes widened with understanding. So, they'll pull back from the door to brace for an explosive breach. Aziel gave a slight nod. But we come in quiet. He removed a small, flexible fiber optic camera from his belt and unspooled it along the floor. Slipping the lens under the door, he watched the feed on his wrist display. The interior of the control room resolved into green clarity. 3 figures moved into defensive positions, 2 with rifles near the back wall and 1 at the center, calm and still, observing the preparations. The leader. The man stood tall, dressed in black tactical gear, his features lean and angular. His eyes, even through the grainy lens, held an amused sharpness. His lips moved as he barked orders to the others, and Aziel adjusted the feed to read the motion of his mouth. Breach in 60. Get ready. Pull back from the door. They'll blow it first. Aziel allowed himself a faint smile. They're repositioning. Alicia shifted her stance, muscles taut. How do we get in if the door's wired? Aziel's gaze flicked upward. Ventilation shaft. Above the left wall. She followed his eyes and spotted the grated opening just beneath the ceiling. Too high. Not for us. He holstered his knife and interlocked his fingers, dropping to a crouch. Step up. Alicia hesitated for half a second before nodding. She placed her foot in his palms, and Aziel surged upward, propelling her toward the grate. Her fingertips caught the metal lip, and she swung herself up with a grunt, disappearing into the vent. Aziel backed into the shadows and waited. Inside the shaft, Alicia crawled forward, the metal warm beneath her palms. Her heart pounded as she neared the grate overlooking the control room. Below, the 2 guards stood near the back wall, rifles trained toward the door. The leader stood closer, watching the entrance with predatory calm. She raised the submachine gun, inhaled deeply, and fired. The bullets shattered the grate and rained down on the guards below. One collapsed instantly, blood spraying across the control panel. The second dove for cover, returning fire into the ceiling. The leader reacted faster. His pistol snapped toward the vent. Alicia dropped before the shot fired. The round slammed into the metal above her, showering her with sparks as she hit the floor with a painful thud. Aziel heard the gunfire and moved. He dashed to the door, leaped, and kicked off the adjacent wall. His hands caught the edge of the shaft opening, and he hauled himself into the vent. The metal groaned beneath his weight as he propelled himself forward, heart racing. He dropped through the shattered grate into the chaos below. The remaining guard turned toward him, rifle rising. Aziel landed in a crouch, twisted, and threw his knife in one smooth motion. The blade pierced the man's throat. Blood sprayed as the body crumpled. The leader moved in the same breath. Aziel turned just in time to block the downward strike of a combat knife. The force sent him stumbling backward, crashing into the control panel. Sparks erupted from the shattered screens behind him. The leader stepped forward, knife twirling in his hand. His eyes glimmered with quiet amusement. "You made it," he said. Was starting to wonder. Aziel's chest heaved. "And you are?" The leader smiled faintly. "The man you should have paid." He lunged. Aziel met the attack, raising his arm to block the strike. The blade slashed across his forearm, pain searing through muscle. He twisted, driving his elbow toward the man's jaw. The leader slipped the strike and slammed his knee into Aziel's side, hitting the already wounded ribs. Aziel gasped as agony exploded through his chest. He staggered, vision darkening at the edges. The leader struck again, this time with brutal efficiency. The handle of his knife cracked against Aziel's temple, sending him crashing to the floor. "Disappointing," the man said, voice casual. "I expected more from the infamous Aziel King." Aziel groaned, his limbs sluggish. The pain blurred his senses. He saw Elysia rising from the floor across the room, the submachine gun in her hands. The leader's eyes followed his gaze. "Ah," the man said softly. "The wife." He pivoted and fired at her. Elysia dove sideways as the shot exploded against the console behind her. Aziel tried to push himself upright, but his limbs refused to cooperate. The leader advanced on her, steps unhurried. Aziel's mind screamed for action. His hand slid to his belt and closed around the last grenade. A concussive charge. His thumb twisted the activation dial to minimum yield and released the safety lever. He hurled it across the floor. The leader heard the clink of metal and turned. His eyes widened as the grenade skidded to a stop between them. The blast detonated with a hollow boom. The concussive wave flattened everyone in the room. Aziel hit the floor with bone-jarring force. His head spun as the sound of the blast echoed through the mill. He blinked away the disorientation and rolled onto his side. The leader lay sprawled near the shattered console, his weapon several feet away. Elysia was already moving. She seized a discarded rifle and leveled it at the man's chest. Aziel pushed himself up, his body trembling with exertion. His voice rasped through the pain. "This isn't over yet." The leader groaned, shifting onto his elbows. Blood trickled from his temple. His lips twisted into a defiant smirk as his eyes flicked toward the doorway. Footsteps echoed from beyond the control room. More of them were coming. The fight was not finished. The crack of approaching footsteps filled the control room like the drumbeat of a final act. The distant echoes of boots on concrete swelled with purpose, the rhythmic advance of reinforcements closing in. Smoke curled through the shattered control panels, mingling with the sharp tang of gunpowder and scorched metal. The air was thick with the remnants of violence, but the battle was far from over. Aziel knelt beside Elysia, both of them battered and breathing heavily. Eyes locked on the gang leader sprawled near the console. Blood smeared the man's forehead, and his chest heaved with labored breaths. His pistol lay out of reach, but the thin smirk curling his lips suggested he still believed the fight was his to win. Aziel's grip tightened around his knife. His muscles screamed with each breath, ribs splintered with pain. But the mission was not over. Not until the man before them was brought down completely. The footsteps grew louder. Reinforcements were seconds away. Elysia's voice, sharp and steady despite the tremor in her limbs, broke the silence. "We can't hold this position." Aziel's eyes scanned the room, cataloging options in a heartbeat. "We don't need to hold it. We need leverage." His gaze landed on the server rack behind the console. Thick metal towers blinking with dim blue indicators. Data storage. The gang's communications network. Everything they had built. All their plans, hidden in encrypted files on those drives. Elysia followed his gaze. "The documents." Aziel gave a single nod. "They took her to make me come. But they also made a mistake. They left the truth sitting right here." The footsteps stopped just beyond the entrance. Shadows clustered beyond the smoke. Silhouettes of gunmen preparing to breach. Aziel turned to Elysia. "Take the data. I'll cover you." "No." Her jaw set. "We do this together." The steel in her voice left no room for argument. Aziel pressed his knife into her hand, then retrieved a flash drive from his belt pouch. "Plug this into the primary port." "Copy everything." Elysia scrambled toward the server rack, while Aziel rose to his feet, positioning himself between her and the entrance. His pistol's magazine was nearly empty, and his knife was gone. He searched the floor and found a discarded shotgun. The weapon's barrel was dented, but the action remained smooth as he chambered around. The gang burst through the doorway. 4 of them, masked and armored, weapons raised. Aziel fired. The shotgun's blast tore through the first attacker's chest. The recoil burned through his injured side, forcing him to step back. The second man dropped to a knee and fired a burst from his rifle. Aziel dove behind the console as bullets shredded the control panel. The third attacker flanked to the left. Aziel leaned out and fired again. The shot hit the man's leg, snapping bone. The man screamed and collapsed, clutching his shattered limb. The fourth raised a grenade launcher. Aziel's stomach dropped. "Alicia, move!" She dove behind the server rack as the grenade arced into the room. The blast shattered the windows and sent shards of glass slicing through the air. Aziel was thrown against the wall, pain erupting through his ribs as he hit the concrete and crumpled to the ground. The world tilted. Sound became muffled static. Blood trickled from his ear as he forced himself upright. His eyes found Alicia on the floor, coughing through the dust. Behind her, the server rack remained intact, the flash drive blinking as it processed the stolen data. The gang leader stirred from where he had collapsed near the console. His eyes flicked to the damaged door. His men were down, but the grenade had opened a path to escape. Aziel saw it too. The man tensed, ready to bolt. Adrenaline flooded his veins, burning away the pain. Aziel lunged, tackling the leader just as he reached the door. They hit the ground hard, rolling across the concrete in a brutal tangle of limbs. The leader drove his elbow into Aziel's broken ribs. Agony lanced through his side, but Aziel responded by slamming his forehead into the man's nose. Bone crunched, and blood sprayed across the floor. The leader twisted free, drawing a concealed knife from his boot. He slashed toward Aziel's throat. Aziel caught the wrist with both hands as the blade trembled inches from his neck. The leader sneered through the crimson streaming from his nose. "All this for a woman and some files. You're already dead." Aziel's teeth ground together as he forced the knife back millimeter by millimeter. His muscles burned, strength failing. His mind raced through every brutal training session, every mission where survival had balanced on the edge of instinct. He shifted his weight suddenly, letting the leader's momentum carry the knife downward. At the last moment, Aziel twisted his hips, wrenching the man's arm to the side. The knife plunged into the gang leader's thigh. The man howled in agony. Aziel slammed his elbow into his temple, dazing him. The leader staggered to his feet, limping toward the door. Alicia's voice cut through the haze. "Aziel!" She threw the shotgun across the room. Aziel caught it, turned, and fired. The slug hit the leader's knee. Bone and tendon exploded as the man collapsed, screaming to the ground. The knife clattered from his grasp. Aziel advanced, breathing ragged, the shotgun barrel lowering toward the man's head. The gang leader's face twisted with pain and rage as he looked up at the barrel. "Go ahead," the man spat. "Kill me. You think this ends with me? You're nothing but a pawn in something bigger." Aziel's finger tightened on the trigger. The memories of the burned-down cabin, the threats over the phone, the bruises on Alicia's skin surged through him. The urge to pull the trigger was overwhelming. Alicia placed a hand on his arm. Aziel's chest heaved as her presence anchored him. He exhaled slowly, then adjusted the shotgun and fired into the man's uninjured leg. The blast tore through flesh, leaving him writhing and screaming in agony. "You don't get the easy way out," Aziel said, voice ice-cold. "You'll rot in a cell." Behind them, the server's light blinked twice and turned green. Alicia limped to the console, yanked the flash drive free, and held it up. "We have it. Names, routes, accounts, everything." Aziel nodded, pulling a pair of handcuffs from the fallen guard's belt. He snapped them onto the gang leader's wrists and pressed the comm device in his ear. "Target secured. Send extraction." The voice on the other end responded immediately. "Copy. Teams inbound." Azil knelt beside the leader, gripping his bloodied collar. "You wanted to make us feel small. You burned everything we had." His voice turned colder. "Now we own yours." The man's eyes, filled with fury and fear, shifted toward the server rack. The knowledge of his empire's collapse registered like a death blow. Azil stood and turned to Alicia. She swayed slightly, and he caught her before her knees gave out. "It's done," she whispered, voice raw. Azil wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. His ribs screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. His eyes drifted to the lifeless screens, and the unconscious leader shackled to the floor. "It's not done," he said softly. "It's just exposed." The distant hum of helicopter blades grew louder as the extraction team approached. Azil tightened his hold on Alicia, grounding himself in the warmth of her presence. The night had tried to break them. The gang had tried to bury them, but together they had torn the empire down to its bones. The night air outside the mill carried the metallic tang of smoke and scorched metal, mingling with the faint, coppery scent of blood. The battle had ended, but its echoes lingered like a fading tremor beneath the earth. Helicopter blades sliced through the darkness, the rhythmic thrum growing louder as the extraction team descended into the clearing beyond the warehouse. Azil stood at the edge of the crumbling loading dock, his posture straight, despite the agony twisting through his ribs. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the fight was gone, leaving behind a leaden weight in his limbs. His side burned, his shoulder throbbed, and his head still rang from the grenade's concussion. But his eyes remained locked on the figure being dragged across the asphalt below. The gang leader, bound and bloodied, sagged between two tactical operatives. His knees scraped the gravel with each step, his body barely held upright by the hands gripping his arms. The smirk he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed vacancy. The weight of defeat hung on him like chains. The extraction team worked with calm precision, securing the perimeter and documenting the evidence left in the wake of the battle. The mill, once a hidden nerve center for SFV's operations, was now a gutted shell, exposed to the world. What had thrived in secrecy for years had been laid bare in one violent night. In the hours that followed, law enforcement and federal investigators swarmed the site, collecting hard drives, ledgers, and encrypted communication. The SFV network, which had orchestrated a series of kidnappings across multiple states, was no longer a shadowed menace lurking beyond reach. With the data Azil and Alicia recovered, the full extent of the gang's operations became clear. Across the country, simultaneous raids were carried out against their remaining cells. Warehouse hideouts were breached, and stashes of weapons and money were seized. In safe houses once used to imprison their victims, law enforcement found evidence of dozens of ransom operations, each meticulously documented with cold efficiency. Victims' names, payment records, and locations of past abductions painted a picture of a gang that had profited from fear and suffering for far too long. Within days, the gang's entire financial network collapsed. The offshore accounts funding their operations were frozen. The shell corporations shielding their activities were dismantled, and their collaborators were arrested. The SFV's leadership, which had once boasted of being untouchable, was now catalogued in federal custody. The enforcer known as Red was found hiding in a motel hours after the mill raid, his bruises and broken jaw testament to Alicia's defiance. Cal, the false hunter who had lured her into capture, was apprehended on the highway attempting to flee the state. Victor Ralston, the man who orchestrated it all, sat in solitary confinement, awaiting trial. Once a contractor for private military firms, he had turned his expertise into a lucrative criminal enterprise. Now, his empire lay in ruins. The SFV's brand, a black swastika interwoven with an iron cross, and the letters SFV etched beneath, became synonymous with organized kidnapping and human trafficking in the headlines. Justice extended beyond arrests and seizures. The communities terrorized by the gang saw restitution from the recovered funds. Families who had lived with the trauma of abduction finally received answers. The properties destroyed by intimidation tactics were rebuilt with financial support derived from the gang's confiscated assets. Survivors were connected with counseling resources, and local law enforcement received federal support to prevent such operations from resurfacing. For years, SFV had operated with impunity, preying on vulnerability. But now, their infrastructure was gone, their leadership dismantled, and their name tarnished beyond repair. What had once been a network of fear was now a cautionary tale about the arrogance of those who believed they were beyond the reach of justice. Aziel's gaze never left Ralston as the operatives hauled him toward the armored vehicle waiting beyond the debris. The gang leader's eyes, swollen and vacant, seemed to understand the weight of what had been lost. His network, his reputation, his control, none of it remained. Aziel's ribs throbbed as he shifted his stance, but the pain paled in comparison to the cold sense of finality that settled in his chest. The mission was complete. SFV was finished, and the nightmare was over. He turned toward Alicia. She stood with her weight shifted to one side, exhaustion pulling at her features. Yet there was a calm resolve in her eyes. Without a word, Aziel wrapped an arm around her shoulders and guided her toward the waiting SUV. They settled into the back seat as the vehicle rumbled to life. The headlights cut through the smoky haze, illuminating the skeletal remains of the mill. The walls that had once hidden the gang's secrets now stood exposed, gutted by the fire and the battle. As the SUV pulled away, Alicia leaned her head against Aziel's shoulder. He felt the warmth of her presence, the solid reassurance that, despite the nightmare, she was here, alive. She exhaled softly. "It feels final," she said. Aziel stared out the window as the burning mill faded into the distance. "It is," he said. "They're done." The road stretched ahead, leading them away from the carnage. The fight was over, and the enemy's grip had been broken. The scars would linger, but the war had been won. The sun dipped low over the coastal skyline as Aziel adjusted the last wooden plank on the new storefront window. The glass reflected the warm hues of twilight, capturing the quiet resilience of the community behind him. His hands, wrapped in protective tape, moved with patient precision as he secured the frame. The sound of footsteps on gravel made him glance over his shoulder. Alicia approached, a cardboard tray of coffee cups in hand. She wore jeans and a navy sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. The bruises had faded to faint shadows, and the scar at her temple had healed to a thin line. "Coffee," she announced, passing him a cup. Aziel took it with a nod. "Perfect timing. Just finished the frame." Alicia stepped beside him and looked up at the building. The newly painted sign above the door read, "King Security and Investigations." She smiled softly. "We really did this." Aziel sipped the coffee and let the warmth settle through him. "We rebuilt it. Better this time." The shop was more than a business. It was a statement that the fire hadn't destroyed them, that fear hadn't won. As if summoned by the thought, the sound of tires crunching on gravel caught their attention. A dark sedan pulled to the curb. The tactical commander from the mill stepped out, his eyes scanning the storefront before nodding to them. "Commander Mason," Aziel greeted, setting down the coffee. Mason extended a folder. "Thought you'd like to know. SFV's network is dismantled. The accounts were seized, the suppliers arrested. Ralston's trial is set for next month." Alicia's jaw tightened. "And the others?" Mason nodded. "The ones still breathing are in custody. This is finished." Aziel accepted the folder and flipped it open. Names, addresses, closed accounts. A once thriving criminal network reduced to paper ruins. Mason smiled faintly. "You didn't just stop one gang. You dismantled everything they stood on. That's not easy to forget." Aziel met his gaze and closed the folder. "We're done." Mason gave a nod and stepped away. As the sedan disappeared around the corner, Alicia stepped closer and laced her fingers with Aziel's. The breeze carried the scent of salt and the promise of a peaceful night. They stood in silence, watching the glow of the setting sun. The weight they'd carried for weeks finally lifted. The gang was gone. The fight was over, and life, once again, was theirs. Elysia squeezed his hand gently. What now? Aziel exhaled slowly and gave her a faint smile. Now we live. Her smile matched his, soft and genuine. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet street, and together they stood in the warmth of a future no longer haunted by the past. The battle was over. The nightmare was gone, and peace at last had come home. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.